Hey, everybody. Welcome to DCARI's 13th virtual fire investigative training session. Today we have David Phelan. Dave has spent 25 years in the fire service. He now works in private investigations in New Jersey. He's part of the New Jersey IAAI. He is going to talk today with us about digital image forensics for the frontline fire investigator. So Dave, go ahead and take it over.
Great, appreciate it very much. Thank you, Bill. So today we're going to talk about digital image forensics. It's one of those areas where if you haven't spent much time looking at it or researching it, you kind of don't think about it. And then something may happen and suddenly you're facing a challenge or a question about your images. And we're going to hopefully get in front of that problem for you. So the first thing, I'm just going to throw this slide up here, and I'm sure Bill will leave it linked on the presentation, but this is a dropbox which I maintain, and it has all the material that we're going to be talking about today, and actually a lot more because this is a scaled down version of the full day program that I do. But you'll be able to download pretty much everything we talk about, as well as there's a full color PDF version of all the slides. So if you wanted to print those or save those for reference in the future, it's all there for you. Be happy to let you share it, pass it around, whatever you need to do is kind of my library, if you will. Just as we get started here, I'm going to try to ingratiate myself to the audience so I can obtain positive feedback. This is my free gift to you. Normally, if we were doing this program live and in person, I would have bought you all breakfast and bagels. But since that's not working right now, this is a worksheet that I put together for dryer fires. And I know this is not an appliance class, so we're not going to focus on dryer fires today. But the point is they're a little bit more common type of fire, and they're one of the more prevalent types of follow-up litigation that I seem to get brought in on. So I made this worksheet as a job aid, and don't let the 8 pages in length intimidate you. It's really meant to facilitate an efficient initial investigation by a public sector agency. So again, that's yours to pass along and hopefully make your job a little easier. So we're going to start the discussion about image forensics, because what you do before you take the photo has bearing on the photo you take. And you have to basically be prepared ahead of time for when you roll up on that incident, pull out the camera, and potentially start capturing images. And so that's really when your photographs start. Your photographs start pretty much as soon as you put the camera away from the last time you used it. And digital photographs, we have to kind of keep them in perspective. They could be items of evidence in your case file. There's nothing that says your photo is any less important or subject to any less scrutiny than a physical evidence item that you may have collected. And in fact, in many cases, your photographs will be the only physical evidence that you can capture. It's very difficult to bring an entire section of wall into a courtroom. You know, it's very difficult to collect and preserve that for future use. So we rely on our photographs to capture items of physical evidence, particularly larger ones and things that we will not be able to collect and transport off the scene. And that concept is pretty clearly laid out in 921. They have those 2 sections to see on the screen there that describe the fact that evidence is not just physical things and small items, and they can include any material on which a fire pattern appears. And so while I might like to bring the fire pattern into the courtroom, the truth is the only feasible way I'm going to do it is likely through good photography. And just like we may think of our photographs starting when we arrive, don't overlook the fact that either if you have an investigator on scene early enough that they can start capturing fire and fire condition photos, that is an incredibly valuable piece of the puzzle. And whether it's done by your own staff or people, or you survey the crowds later on and you try to collect those images, there's a lot that can be glommed off of initial photos and fire condition photos. So we're going to talk about a couple of significant court cases when it comes to photography for any kind of forensic or scientific purpose, particularly criminal prosecution. Because the truth is, challenges or questions over digital images are really not new. In fact, there's a pretty substantial history of court challenges over film photography. And so just because the technology has brought us into the digital world doesn't mean that there's any different or any less of a degree or more of a degree of hazard for image integrity. And that lays right out in this Sullins case, this 1977 court case, in that they've already established that video is subject to the same admissibility rules as still images. And then following that up with the 96 and the 2001 cases there, the court ruled that there's no known different rules just because you're introducing digital images, whether they be still photos or digital video. The court is the ultimate arbiter in admissibility of any evidence. And while the digital technology introduces concepts, they don't necessarily require new evidence admissibility standards. So in the reality of it, the admission of your evidence, your photographic evidence and your video evidence is still subject to the same rules and the same thresholds that were in place when it was film-based. And just because the technology may be prone to some manipulation challenges or concerns, that doesn't mean that there's anything different the court's going to consider. Ultimately, you have to prove to the court that you have integrity in your images. And that's really what we're going to move forward talking about. This last case, this Williams case, is pretty interesting as well. It was a challenge over the admissibility of photographs because the doctor who was testifying was being shown multiple victims and in multiple photos. And it was unclear which photo was depicting which victim. And so that's something we need to consider because we potentially may be photographing multiple victims at a given scene. And this particular case brought out that issue that in many photos, it was unclear which photo was of which victim. And since it, is likely to happen, it's likely to happen to us in the future, it's something that we need to consider going forward and being prepared so that when we do have, let's just say, 3 victims laying on the front lawn of a house and they're being worked on by EMS and maybe one or more of them is deceased, capturing photographs needs to consider how will we positively identify those people in those photographs. Different techniques exist. There's different thoughts on what you can do. It's just something that your agency needs to look at and talk through ahead of time so that you don't end up in this scenario with the doctor and the testimony. So one of the unique things about digital images is that there is no one universal set of rules that has been accepted or endorsed by every level of the judicial system, civil and criminal at all, whether it's local, municipal court, all the way up to potentially the Supreme Court. So as the result of not having this single universal set of rules, the court has instead instituted essentially a 3-part admission standard for evidentiary items such as digital images and digital video. And they center on these 3 words: relevance, authenticity, and reliability. Those 3 things have to be demonstrated to the satisfaction of the court that you particularly are in for that judge to determine whether that item is admissible. So as we start to lay out our handling of images, we need to consider these 3 things because some of them take place before we even take the first image. Before we click the shutter for the first scene photo, we have to already be considering how will we demonstrate later on that we have met an acceptable threshold for image relevance, authenticity, and reliability. Those are the key points that the courts will consider. All right. So the first one is establishing relevance of an image. And relevance essentially says that the photograph that you provide or the video clip demonstrates the matter that you're capturing, but does not unfairly prejudice or mislead the viewer. That's the key, is that it is truly a documentary photograph or video. We're not trying to use the photo to present our skew of things or our conclusions as to what happened. And a good example, if you need to visualize this, in the old days, especially in the old black and white crime movies, you would often see a clip or a scene where there's a suspect who's generally beaten, handcuffed to a chair, with a detective standing around them, holding the gun or the knife that was supposedly found in their pocket or possession. And so that image has the tendency to prejudice the person looking at it. In fact, the picture is almost a foregone conclusion to the fact that here's who did it, here's how they did it, and they resisted arrest when we caught up to them, which perhaps implies guilt. And so that kind of thing in the photograph, while it may have worked on TV in the movies and perhaps in days gone by, that type of image would likely not get admitted into the court because it likely causes prejudice or has the inclination to mislead. All right, so we always have to present the image in a way that is purely documentary. All right, where we may testify to what we saw, we may write about what the implications of the photo are, but at the end of the day, the photo only speaks for itself. It doesn't go beyond that. And so there's a pretty good court case that comes out of it, out of the state of Michigan. It's this Brown versus Mutual Life Insurance. That's not a typo. This court case over the photographic challenge occurred in 1887. All right, so there was concern and in fact manipulation of photographs long before digital technology began appearing in the say mid to late 90s, 1990s. Right, so nearly 100 years before consumer digital photography, there was a challenge. And what's unique about this one is the photographer at that point in history, if you wanted to buy life insurance, it was difficult to go see a doctor because most small towns and communities didn't have doctors. And people were unlikely to travel to major cities just to get an insurance physical. So this photographer, Brown, went around photographing people for their life insurance because it was acceptable at that period of time to present a portrait of yourself as part of your life insurance application. And if the insurance company evaluated your application and your photograph and determined that you were in good health, you were an acceptable risk and they would write a policy. Well, this photographer said, I have a better plan. I will charge people who are in failing health, that are sickly and likely to die, and I will cast them in a positive light to create this acceptable portrait or image. And as a result, there was a fair amount of insurance fraud, and later it became part of the criminal process in which the photographs were challenged because they had the ability and the skill in photography to misrepresent fact. All right, and this all goes back to the argument of relevance. And so ultimately, at the end of the road, when you're sitting in a courtroom where perhaps you're being deposed, you have to be able to answer to the fact that the photograph truly and accurately represents the date and the time that you captured the image. And so that being said, just caution and brace yourself, because attorneys have this way of asking questions and getting us on a certain path. And so there's a distinction that your photographs will capture between as you found a scene versus as you dug it out or in the process of digging it out. And so this example, yes, this you could accurately testify to. This is a photograph that depicts the room, in this case, the kitchenette, as I found it on, January 1st at 1:30 in the afternoon, clearly. But then what happens is we start to get used to answering questions. Did you investigate the fire? Yes. Did this fire occur on January 1st? Yes. Was it at 10 Main Street? Yes. Does this photo accurately represent the room as you found it? And if you're thinking from your prior questions and you're confident in your photographs, you are likely to say yes, except the photo that they flash on the screen next is this one. And this is not the room as you found it. This is the room as your investigation was proceeding. So just be careful, just be aware of, as the court or the attorney is trying to set up your relevance testimony, that they don't manage to sidetrack you in a pattern of rapid fire questions where you're answering yes, 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 and then throw the question in here where the answer to this question is, no, that's not how I found that room. That photograph depicts the room in a part of the investigative process. Yes, we're at floor level and we did a wash. Okay, we rinsed the floor. So just keep that tucked away in the back of your mind. Okay. Similarly, this kind of goes to relevance, and it's interesting. It's one of the few things that I miss about doing public sector work, is that when I responded to a fire scene on the public side, it was very easy for me to lock down access to that building, street, room, whatever I had to do. I could very easily control and limit access to the point of even excluding other responders if necessary. And so now on the private side, I have to deal with this little element of people who are curious about what I'm doing. This is a very basic hotel room fire. It's, it's not the crime of the century. And as I'm setting up to document conditions as I found them, well, the owner happens by and, sticks his head into the image. And over on the left side, actually, you can capture the jacket of someone else. Just be cognizant that it's not only just civilians or bystanders. It could sometimes be your own personnel, other responders. And when you're setting up your scenes for capturing as found conditions and documenting the overall scene, just be cognizant of where people are. And if you have to, politely say, I need you to hang on a second, I got to get a shot here. And it sets up a question later on about what that person was doing when you're trying to testify as to the relevance of the photo. And the easiest way around it is just to exclude those outside distractions. All right. And then this is same fire. This was a mistake I made. And after I made it, I was like, I think that photo is going to make its way into a class because it captures something else that sometimes we often overlook. And that is, here's my room. I've done a lot of debris removal, reconstructed, repositioned furniture, trying to most closely replicate conditions at the time of the fire. And now I'm taking, the best I can of a wide angle photo to really send the message about here's what we're working with in this scene. And lo and behold, as soon as I capture the picture, I realize, I've left my whisk broom sitting on the edge of the bed. Okay, that's not a fire scene artifact. That's one of my tools. That has to be corrected. And more so is the hotel room door. All right, this was really, after I did it, I thought to myself, wow, I thought I knew better. And it just sometimes slips our mind. So when you're working a single room and contents fire, say, and you have your scene is concentrated within a single room, whether it's a bedroom, a bathroom, a hotel room, an office, whatever it may be, we have this tendency that we open the door so we can walk into the room, but we haven't positioned the door in the fire position, using our protected areas and our marks to try to establish whether the door was open, closed, partially in between, whatever it was. And so here I am taking the picture, focusing on the left side, which is where the origin apparently was and what I'm trying to document. And I'm leaving the right side of the picture wide open. The door was clearly closed at the time of the fire. And a typical door leaves about 20 square feet of information. So my photo right there has a 20 square foot hole in it. And that's just big enough to make you look foolish. So if you're setting up the shots to document patterns, and in this case, I'm trying to emphasize that the patterning all comes from the left lower side versus the right side, it's really not a good idea to make that argument when you've got your doorway or your opening, whether it's an overhead door in a garage or something else, not in the correct position. So again, just kind of keep that in mind. Yes, we're taking pictures of the fire scene, but we also want to make sure that we're accurate in the messages we're sending with those photos. The next of the three parts, the second step, is this authentication of an image. And the authentication is generally considered fairly straightforward, but it is a crucial step. It's the establishing by testimony or swearing that the images are accurate and that someone can personally verify that. And that's the key, is that authentication of a digital image does not have to be made by the person who actually took the photograph. Another investigator on the team or as part of that scene can corroborate the facts of the photograph. And in fact, there is great court language on this very point from 1981. We don't necessarily need the actual photographer as long as there's someone else that can provide this personal authentication. The caveat really is, though, you have to have the photo log in your case file. If you're not currently doing photo logs as part of your case file, you're leaving an opening. And depending upon circumstances and timeframes, it could be a very big opening for someone to challenge the images. I mean, just think about, we could roll out tonight and go to a fire scene and handle our investigation, skip the photo log, and then in 5 years when it comes up, say for trial, well, where's the photographer? Oh, well, geez, didn't you hear? He passed from COVID. He retired and is no longer, we can't find him. He went off grid and he's living, in the mountains somewhere. All of these potentials exist in the world around us, and we have to close that gap long before it happens. And the individual photo log is really the instrument to do that, because it creates the record of every image that was captured, as well as the person or persons who actually captured them. And so now we can show through case documents, here's who took the images, these are the images involved, and they all represent the body of work, as the lead investigator could testify to, or another investigator who's still available, okay? This is kind of why it's generally a good idea, we'll call it a best practice, that any given camera stays in the hands of the same photographer throughout the course of an incident. Even if the incident spans multiple shifts or multiple working periods, at the conclusion of every work period and before the next team or the next photographer picks up, we really would want to change the memory card just to create this distinctive start and stop between who was working the camera at any given time. Now, that doesn't mean you can't have multiple cameras on a fire scene. In fact, if you're organized about it, that is a very efficient way to work, okay? But it's not generally a good idea for the camera to change hands. If the camera does have to change hands because of long work periods or long scene times, we should generally be changing the memory cards, the memory in the process of the changeover. Because if there is an issue of image authenticity, the photographs in question are directly tied to a single investigator or a single photographer, and that person can testify, yes, I'm the one working the camera. I did not alter any images. I did not delete any images. These are the images I took in the order I captured them. All right. And so that's the testimony that could be offered. And if there's further challenges, then we can dig a little bit deeper and go into some of the true technology forensics, where we look at EXIF and metadata, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But generally speaking, we are going to rely and present our images via testimony and case file documents. And we're only going to look to the technology to back us up if those things need to be further supported. In other words, your initial defense should not also be your last defense in this case. All right. And the last of the three was reliability. And reliability really comes down to how much confidence can you provide the court, and therefore can the court provide to the jury or to other parties in the case that these images are reliable. You can rely upon them. If it shows the sky is green, that's because the sky was green, not because somebody did something else along the way. All right. And so there's been a couple of court cases already that have made their way through the federal system looking at altering versus intentional manipulation and image enhancement, okay? And thus far, the courts have allowed these properly enhanced photos, and they haven't cast this wide, broad brush that anything that touches the image is considered alteration. And that's a very key distinction that we have to be aware of. Nothing currently prohibits you from using image enhancement tools or techniques. But if you're going to apply either one, it is absolutely critical that you do two things to ensure the potential admissibility. And the first is you always save your original image file. Nothing is done, and you can demonstrate that anything you did, you are working on a direct copy. So when in doubt, I always still maintain the original image file as my unimpeachable evidence. And the second is when you do, say, brighten a photograph or increase contrast, just a very basic thing to overcome lighting issues. When you present that either electronically or in print format in a report, you clearly call out that this is the enhanced image to provide better contrast or whatever your intent was. And you should keep track. You don't necessarily have to write it into your report, but in your case file, write every step you took. If you added 5% brightness and 2% contrast, and then you went back and changed it to 8% brightness and reduced it to -1 contrast, you write the steps so that if there's a question, you can recreate the enhanced image from the original image file and demonstrate, yes, this is what I did, and this is what yielded the result. So there can be little question. This is another court case. This was actually a homicide. And if you have a moment, I believe the Discovery Channel did a documentary on the entire crime, but they spent a fair amount of time focusing on the trial and the admissibility of a bloodstained print that was recovered from bed linen. And what makes that so interesting is because the linen was processed in the lab to establish the blood stain, but that didn't create the positive identification. The lab technician then used a digital camera to capture a photograph, a high resolution photograph of this print on the bed linen, but that had essentially interference from the stitching pattern in the fabric. So the lab technician then used a image filtering overlay to remove the texture from the image, but still leave the detail of the fingerprint. And then once that was done, they had a usable print that yielded a match. And that seems just the far side of, theoretically impossible. And of course, it led to challenges on appeals. But when all was said and done, the testimony of the lab technician, the technique, was pretty high level, considering this was 1995. They literally wheeled the technician's computer into the courtroom, and the technician recreated the steps one by one that yielded this essentially recognizable fingerprint that a fingerprint examiner then turned into a conclusion about the owner of the bloodstained finger, and it happened to be the suspect. So anything is theoretically possible, but along the way, there are steps to be made to ensure if we do end up in that courtroom, we could theoretically recreate it, and we know exactly what we did, and most importantly, we can explain what we were doing to the satisfaction of the court. All right. So all that being said, what's the point? Why are we even bothering? And probably some right now are thinking to themselves, we don't do any of this. And is that right or wrong? Well, you have to ask yourself the question. In any given case file, if all of your photographs were to be excluded on evidentiary grounds relating to reliability, authenticity, or relevance, how good would your case still be? Chances are good that if we were to lose our photos on any given case, we would no longer have a viable case, because so much of what we do today is based on presenting these scene photographs or these evidence photographs as part of either supporting our testimony, supporting our conclusions, and potentially, telling the story of what happened. And so, yes, it's exceptionally important that we are addressing this prior to the moment of image capture, because there's no chance at going back. Once we are done at the scene and we think we've captured everything, if we find out later on that, whoops, that picture didn't come out too well, or, well, we didn't get that image, or we didn't take a picture of X, Y, and Z, that's just as bad as having the photos that you do have excluded later because there are questions raised challenging authenticity, reliability, or relevance. And so it's too late in any of those scenarios, it's too late to go back to the scene and try over. So in reality, we have to be doing this all along so that when it arrives, we are ready for it. We have a contingency. We have already set forward how to answer these questions. And so we kind of already understand this, that digital images can be either enhanced, manipulated, or altered relatively easily. Back in film days, you had to have a better idea what you were doing, and it took a little bit better skill to do it. Didn't make it impossible by any stretch. Now, when we look at it, though, we need to kind of keep our terminology in order here. And there's really three terms that you have to be aware of when it comes to your digital images. The first is processing, the second is enhancement, and the third is alteration or manipulation. And so when you're writing a report or you're providing testimony, try to keep these terms in mind and correctly apply them. Digital processing. Image processing is an action that takes place either in the camera or within camera software to create the viewable image we see on download or any form of extraction. And I'm going to show you that in a moment, but just keep in mind that there's something happening in your camera the moment you press the shutter button, and it's not exactly what you think it is. The second is enhancement, and enhancement is post-image capture changes, things that we do to that digital image after we have captured it and brought it out of the camera. We download the camera, we're looking at it on the screen in the office, and we go, it's a little bit dark. I mean, I know the object is over here in the corner, but it's not really evident. And so we start to look to use different software tools to enhance the image. We're not changing the image. We're not adding data or taking data away, but we're making it more viewable or more usable. And in fact, 921 very specifically talks about this as a legitimate tool. The third is the forbidden act, altering or manipulating the photo. The claim or the actual action that we did something to misrepresent the actual data of the image. All right, this is not what we would ever do, and we need to be clear on this. If somebody raises the question of, well, it says in your report, you brightened and added contrast to show this detail. Didn't you manipulate the photo? Didn't you alter it? No, I did not. I used an image enhancement tool that brought the existing data into a usable view versus adding data or taking it away from the image. Very important terminology to make sure we clearly understand. Briefly, I'll talk about meta or EXIF, EXIF data. This is what we generally kind of understand is lurking in the background of our image files. When you look at an image file on the screen, you want to think that you're seeing everything. The truth is there's usually a little bit more data tucked away in the image file that talks about the specifics of the image, whether it's the metadata, which simply refers to the actual, I'll say, moment in time of the image, the date and time it was captured, which is variable. There's a whole set of considerations when you look at image date and time, whether the camera device is using an internal field set camera and calendar, or if it's synchronizing perhaps like a cell phone or a tablet, which even that can be manually adjusted. So date and time is subjective, certainly, but that's part of meta. Sometimes it may include the GPS information of the device if that is turned on. In some cases, photographers name their cameras in settings. So every image that comes out of the camera, the meta contains an author information. I have that set on my camera under the name of my name and the company, so that if any image shows up and there's a question of did you take the picture, well, I can tell you real quick, if we go look at the metadata, if it was taken with my camera, it will have my name and my company name in the meta of the file. If it's not there, that's not 100% guarantee, because it is possible to edit metadata. And in fact, as you move from the camera to the first computer, to the second computer, the third, fourth, fifth computer, and any software utilities that you may open the image with, the accuracy, not so much the accuracy, the reliability is the better word. Reliability of the metadata changes as you move further and further away from the original device. The EXIF data, the abbreviation EXIF, Exchange Information Format, that's the actual nuts and bolts of the equipment that captured the image. So if you're looking at EXIF data, you're likely to see the make and model of the camera, what settings were being applied. If it was a phone, you're likely to see the make and model of the phone. There may also be carrier name or carrier information in the EXIF. But that is essentially what EXIF is compared to meta. They work together. However, their use and reliability is very subjective and can be changed even unknowingly. So it's very important, particularly when we talk about getting images from people. When a civilian or a bystander provides you with an image, things you want to do to shore up your reliability, because if they send it to you and you copy it and email it or forward it to yourself, the meta is losing reliability in each transaction. All right, so here's a fairly straightforward example. Car fire taking place in broad daylight. Generally speaking, one or two sides of the car will be very well lit from the sunlight, and then the opposite two sides will be heavily shadowed. And as luck will usually have it, the sides that are more critical are the ones that are generally in the shadows. So, this may be an example of an image you would capture, and it doesn't look too bad, but it doesn't play very well either, particularly if your point of the image is to show demarcation and show pattern, either by movement or intensity. And so you take that photo and you push it through a commercial program that allows you to brighten and add contrast, simply to make that more viewable. Yeah, the background of the photo is almost completely washed out. It's an F for portrait quality, but it took you from like a C to a B plus, A minus, because now you can look and point specifically to the patterns and the indications that those are giving you. So it's legitimate to do it. We just have to take those two very critical steps. Always preserve the original and clearly disclose this is an altered. This is an enhanced image, and here were the steps that I used to enhance it. And just side by side, yeah, it's pretty clear when you look at the original against the enhanced image. The information is still the same. I didn't add a gas can. I didn't take away a gun. I simply brought into view and made the information that was there more usable for the audience that we were presenting to. So normally in person, I'd ask this question, but we can kind of do it the same way. The presumption I have is that everyone here has used a digital camera to take an investigative photo. And then that photo may have been passed to either another investigative agency, such as like a a higher level county, state, or even federal agency. You may have given it in civil litigation, given it over as part of discovery to the attorneys involved. And either it was implied, or in some cases, you may have had to transmit a certification form attesting to the fact that these are the original images you captured on this day and this time, and you haven't done anything to alter or manipulate them. If it's in-person testimony, like a deposition, they'll ask you to testify to that these are the original images you captured. And these are the images that came right out of your agency camera, whatever it may be. And most people would sit there and go, absolutely, yeah, of course, that's what I did. And that's fine, because that's the way it looks like we do everything every day. The truth is, if the image file that you downloaded from your camera and that you now have on your computer and you may have burned to a disk or whatever you did with it, if you're working in a JPG or JPEG format and you said yes, you unintentionally, but you didn't tell the truth. All right. The truth is that when you download your camera and you get a JPEG format image out of it, you are presenting a one-off digitally processed image. That was that third term. Remember processing? Processing is what happens inside the camera between the moment you press the shutter button and the moment it gets written to the memory card. Okay. Practically every camera out there, whether it's a consumer level, a prosumer, high-end digital camera that we're using, handheld, point and shoot, DSLR, our tablet, our cell phones, we are taking pictures and we are producing JPG or JPEG format images. Okay, that's just the reality. From the 1986 JPEG standard, which is what it was. It was just a committee that wrote a file standard for digital images. All right, it happened to be the one that gathered the most acceptance in the market. And it really did that for one very important reason, and that was the ability of it to compress. It allowed the device, the camera, the early phone, to take the picture and store it using the least amount of memory. And therefore, the product you were using, the camera or the phone, could be advertised as holding, this incredible number of photographs. And it worked. But in order to understand why it worked, you need to know the backstory. And the backstory is that in 1986, when they were writing this digital image file format, they were looking at live scenes where there was abundant sunlight, because that was the presumption that we were going to put these digital cameras in the hands of lay people, citizens, normal people, everyday photographs of kids in the backyard, family vacations at the beach. They would be well lit, and we would not be too concerned with sharp contrast between adjacent pixels. And so color subtlety between adjacent colors was not necessarily a concern. Well, in the reality, we work in fire scenes and we often rely on an image that can provide distinctive contrast, sometimes very sharp lines of demarcation in patterns. All right, that is absolutely not what the JPEG format was designed to do. JPEG is considered a very high loss, in other words, a somewhat sloppy image format when it comes to technical subjects, technical, scientific, and medical subjects. The image files that a lot of digital X-ray machines and law enforcement digital scanners, they're not capturing in JPEG. Most of the time they're capturing in the TIFF format. All right, that is a dramatically different file format because it doesn't compress the image. And as you see there, JPEG can have a compression rate of up to 10:1, which means you are only saving 10% of the data which the camera actually captured or saw. And that is a huge impact in a scientific field such as fire investigation. It results in degraded image quality, and If you open the image repeatedly in different applications, different software programs, and then you save it, you are potentially re-squeezing more and more data by compression out of the final image. And it isn't long before you're looking at the photo going, man, this looked a lot better when I looked at it that day in the office after the fire. And now a week later, it's been passed around the office and different people have sent it to different people who have opened it on different machines. The image looks a little bit different now. That is the act of this perpetual recompression that JPEGs are famous and popular for, while also being exceptionally notorious. And it is the Achilles heel, more so than concerns over did someone alter or enhance a digital image. We're so fixated on digital images being altered and enhanced that we're really missing the much bigger Achilles heel here. And it's generally not talked about for any number of reasons. So here's my graphic to try to illustrate this for you, because it's important to understand how your camera is working. All right, and if we start in the bottom left there, we've got our intended fire scene artifact, the guilty gas can. We need a picture of it. We aim our digital camera, whether it's a high-end DSLR or even just a point and shoot basic camera. Whatever we have is what we're working with. We aim the camera at the subject. The image sensor, which is the circuit board at the top, sees what we're pointing at, okay? That's what we intend to capture, the picture of the gas can. So we press the shutter on the camera, and within a matter of a moment, we hear maybe a little beep, a light flashes, and boom, the image is captured. It's not done. The moment you capture the image, you're telling the camera, whatever is on the sensor is what I want. And if your images are coming out of your camera as JPEG files, before it gets to the memory card, it takes that red arrow pathway and it goes through the onboard image processor in the camera. And the onboard image processor writes the image sensor file as a JPEG while running the compression algorithm. In other words, in that split second, that moment we captured the image, and then if you ever notice, after you take a picture, it usually takes your camera anywhere from 1 to maybe 3 seconds to kind of reset itself and get ready for the next picture. In that time delay, that is the image processor inside the camera deciding what pixel data is not relevant to your picture, discarding it, and then writing the compressed, the squeezed image to your memory card. And that's what you'll later see when you download your JPEG. If you have a camera, generally they're a little bit more advanced, therefore a little more expensive. If your camera has the capability of saving in either RAW, R-A-W, RAW file, or sometimes now you'll see it as DNG format, digital negative, that is a very different routing and pathway. When it leaves the image sensor, it takes the green arrow path. And if it's a raw image file, absolutely 100%, in other words, every individual pixel on your camera, that data is written to the memory card. And so a raw image file is the true image file that the camera sensor saw. It hasn't been squeezed, it hasn't been compressed. You get exactly what the camera saw. And if you're very fortunate and you've got a camera that shoots simultaneously and will save RAW with JPEG or DNG, digital negative with JPEG, that's what you need to be shooting in. You need to be creating the parallel set. Because if you only shoot in RAW or digital negative, you've got high quality photos, but they are not readily shareable with anyone else. Because the only people that can open a raw image photo are the people that have your camera specific software. And that's problematic. It's exactly why the JPEG file format is so widely used, because no matter who takes it on Android, Mac, Apple, a third party, a tablet, whatever type of equipment was used to capture the image, if it's saved as a JPEG, it is instantly shareable and postable, And anyone who has a device that can read and display a JPEG file has access to your image immediately. Raw and digital negatives are not facilitated for that rapid dissemination and widespread sharing. They have to be processed first through a photo program, or the person who's opening them has to have your camera specific viewing utility. And that is an obstacle that seems like many people to be insurmountable. It's not. It's just an extra step. Okay. And so once we've captured these raw or digital negative files, what do we do with them? Well, if you're capturing raw or digital negatives and your camera is also capturing simultaneously and writing a JPEG, in other words, the twin image, if you will, although it's not clearly the same, you don't have to do anything because you have usable JPEGs that you can very easily disseminate amongst other people, other agencies, people on your team, whatever it is. But you have to preserve those raw or negative files because they are the true original image files, and they contain everything that will back up any type of challenge or question as to when it was captured, how it was captured, and what was actually there present when it was captured. Because a raw image file has this very unique high-level forensic capability. And that is, once a raw image file is opened in a computer application, it cannot be changed in any way. There is no enhancement. There's no alteration. There's nothing that can be done to a raw image file that can then be saved in the raw format. You can open a raw file, play with it, enhance the coloring, enhance the brightness, the contrast, whatever you may want to do, but you will have to save it in another format. And that will easily reflect the fact that you no longer are working with the original file. Okay, so from a accountability standpoint and a forensics forensic footprint, a fingerprint, the raw file is an exceptionally valuable component. Digital negatives are similar, but they are not camera specific. The digital negative format is an industry standard that is gaining popularity and acceptance. And as a result, it is possible, although very difficult, to open a digital negative, enhance or manipulate it, and resave it as a digital negative. All right, someday we'll get to the point where it doesn't mean anything because it will happen very easily. But for right now, it's difficult to do, although not impossible. And therefore, the step away from raw into digital negative has taken a bite out of the forensic reliability. It's not the best thing in the world, but it's the way the industry is heading. And so we just have to, be ready to work with it. Once you have the raw file, in addition to essentially being gospel when it comes to reliability and authenticity of the photo and the circumstances of the photo, it is also the best way to work with in image enhancement software. It will yield the higher quality result. If you take a JPEG file and enhance the brightness, coloring, or shadow lines, whatever it is, it'll come out okay. But if you had started with the original raw file and made those same enhancements, your finished result will be much better. That's just simply the virtue of working with all data versus compressed data, okay? And probably right now, some people are wondering, I don't even know what my camera does or what format it shoots in. How do I figure this out? Well, it's fairly straightforward, okay? Most of us know what our camera is advertised to do when it comes to megapixels. I have a 10 megapixel camera, I have a 30, whatever it is, generally it's printed on the front or some part of the camera, because the megapixel count has become the marketing arm of the industry for trying to convince us which cameras are better than any others. Ostensibly, if I have a 10 megapixel camera and a 20 megapixel camera, there's an argument that the salesperson will make that'll say, well, you're going to get twice as good a photo, or it'll be better by a factor of 2. nah, it's not quite exactly how it works. So realize this, for every individual pixel in your camera's image sensor, and they're not precise. If you have a 20 megapixel camera, it's not exactly 20 megas. It's something very close to 20. 1 pixel is 1 byte of data, which means 1 megapixel of camera sensor is equal to approximately a 1 megabyte image file. And therefore, take a series of photographs, just go outside in the parking lot, whatever it is, take 8 or 10 photographs with your camera, download them, and look at those 8 or 10 JPEG files. Look at the file size that you're getting. And there'll be variations, but you'll be able to quickly kind of zero in on a range of saying, well, they're coming in about between 8 and 10 megabytes each. And that would lead you to believe that you're using roughly an 8 to 10 megapixel camera. Except your camera says on it that it's a 25 megapixel camera. Well, that's entirely possible. What that's telling you is that the end result, that end JPEG file, is being compressed beyond 50%. So if you have a 25 megapixel camera, you would expect it to take a 25 megabyte image. When your images are coming out at 8 to 10 megabytes, that's telling you right there the difference between 25 and 8 to 10, how much data that every image sensor sees is being discarded. And so you're talking about losing more than 50% of the image quality and the image data just because of the camera's current settings and that onboard processor that is writing the JPEG off the original image file. Now, I won't tell the boss, but when you bought that 25 megapixel camera and they had to authorize the money to do it, they probably had the understanding that you'd be using it for more or less all 25 megapixel capacity. You don't need to buy a 25 megapixel camera if you're only shooting it at, say, 50%. Could have bought you a 12 megapixel camera for a lot less money, and you'd more or less be taking the same photograph. So as a rule, whatever settings your camera allows you to control with regard to rate of compression or image quality, you turn the compression down as low as it goes. You're telling the camera, I want to save as much of the data as possible. Don't go throwing out half of my picture on me. All right? I need that. And you'll decide through your settings to tell the camera, this is what I want you to do. All right. The photo log. Without the photo log, there are future questions that could come from authentication problems. Again, particularly if the original investigator or the original photographer who took the images is no longer available for any number of reasons. So you write the photo log. After you download the camera back in the office, every single image, the goods, the bads, the uglies, the ones with your finger over the lens, doesn't matter. Every image gets logged. And it's not a big deal. It's a little bit tedious. You know, if you're shooting 300 photographs at a structure fire, it's going to take you a little bit of time, but it is absolutely a critical step. You have to identify the image file name and a very brief description, very brief. You don't have to explain what the photo shows. You just have to provide a means that the person looking at the photo log can confirm that they have the correct image. It's not a big deal, all right? Because that's the way that document tells whoever reads your report, look, here's my report, say it's 10 pages, and I used 5 photographs at different parts of the report to make my case, to tell you what's happening, okay? But here's my photo log or a copy of my photo log. It actually tells you that there are some 300 photographs in the case file. And if you need them, I'll get them to you. But I don't have to print all 300 pictures every time I print the report. So it's a big waste of time, and most people are not going to be interested. And if it's never been said enough to make the point, you never delete off the camera, never. If you take a picture and you realize, I had the lens cap on, or it, my finger was over the lens, it was fogged up, whatever it is, leave it. Don't worry about finding the delete button. Don't play with it. You will be better off in the future if you can testify that I don't even know how my camera deletes because I've never used the delete button. Okay, I don't delete images. Bad images in a sequence of a fire scene, bad photos tell me that you are taking authentic pictures. I have a problem believing that in a run of 300 photographs, there wasn't a single bad one. Nah, it probably means that some got deleted. All right, leave them in there. Just don't worry about it. Remember, it's a digital camera. We're not paying per picture to develop it. This is a sample photo log that is on the Dropbox if you need something to work with. It's a very, very basic, just sometimes time-consuming step in building the case file, okay? But it essentially is not optional. It really is not. We've talked about what the photo log does in the case file, so we don't have to beat that any further. Another step in building the reliability that can be attached to your images is a title card, whether it's a color version such as the one that's here, and you can download that from your from the Dropbox. A way that this photo storytelling that's about to take place through your investigation, a way that we mark the start, and I don't want to say more so, but equally important is that you also mark the end of the photos. So some people have asked me, when I've done classes or whatever, they'll say like, hey, do you have a sample policy or protocol on what pictures to take at a fire scene? Nope, because I don't believe that there is any such document that could reliably be generated. But I will tell you that every fire scene photo segment or photo roll, as it were, will contain certain photos. And the first one and the last one will always be this information or title card, because that conveys the message. Here's what I started, here's when I finished, and everything in between is the body of work. There's no doubt where the photos end. And therefore there can't be questions later on that say, well, the last picture you provided us shows a picture of the front door. What does that mean? Does that mean you were done? Does that mean you went outside to get a coffee? What does that mean? And if they want to, they create all sorts of doubt by saying, how do we know you didn't go back in and look at something else? Because here it is, a hard start and a hard finish. And that speaks to the entire string of photos as much as it speaks to any single photo in that string. All right. A little discussion here about archiving, because after we've taken these pictures and we download them back at the office and we look at them, we have to handle them essentially for the life of the investigation or whatever the retention period is in any given jurisdiction. And that can be quite a number of years, depending upon if it was death or injury, depending upon if it was juvenile, crime solved, crime not solved. There's all sorts of rules that apply, and we have to be able to preserve those images, one, so that they're available, and two, that if we do need to produce them, we can still testify to how they were handled after capture and potentially over the course of years. Okay. Generally speaking, download the camera or the memory card as quickly as possible after the incident. I've come across a fair number of people over the years that'll tell me, I download the camera like once a month because it holds like 1,000 pictures. Well, it holds 1,000 pictures. That's good. When you're on the 29th day of the month and you drop the camera off the roof or into a puddle at a fire scene, what happens to the other 28 days of fire investigations you did? So yeah, we get them off the camera as quickly as possible. The good news is about digital cameras, digital technology, we can take a lot of pictures for very little cost. The downside is some of that cost savings has to be put forward towards holding that data for its lifetime. Another concern I'll just put out there, if you're using a commercial software program, whether it's a NIFRS program or a specific fire investigative software program that allows you to attach the photos or embed them in a report, I haven't found a commercial package yet that doesn't take the image file, the JPEG that you captured, and compress it further. And unfortunately, many times once it gets compressed and put into the software application, it cannot be extracted out of the application as an image file. It can be printed as paper or as a PDF, but essentially that original image file gets squeezed once again, more data is discarded, and that data can never be repopulated. So it's fine if you want to do it. If you have a system that allows you to attach photos or insert them with a report or a case file, feel free to do it. But you still have to maintain those original downloaded image files. Preferably, if you're shooting in RAW or digital negative, they have to be preserved essentially on their own on a server or on your system somehow. Because 5 or 8 or 10 years from now, when we go to trial and the prosecutor wants to take the photo of the gas can with the fingerprint on it and blow it up and put it on a 5x3 poster in the courtroom, the compressed image that's in your software package will not allow that to happen. It will become entirely pixelated. So you need to still maintain that original file, that original image file. We should already know, but everything stays on either a government or agency-owned server outside of your individual or any individual's control. There's a lot of reasons why this is necessary for establishing authenticity in the future. And perhaps the best one is this. If you're working on your own, and perhaps especially in like a volunteer or rural environment, you download the camera when you get back home and the files are on your home computer. If something happens to that computer, the hard drive goes south or something else happens and those images cannot be recovered, that's a big problem, and it may push an expense onto you. If you maintain it on an agency-owned computer and something mechanically or physically happens with the hardware, that agency is going to need to recover because it's a lot more than just your photos that's involved. And so that will prevent, or I say protect you from claims about improper evidence handling because you were following the procedure and it is maintained on the government or agency-owned computer. All right, that's exceptionally important. We talked about if your camera can shoot in dual mode with JPEG and RAW. If it can, you really need to seriously consider doing that, figuring out what it will entail for image archiving in the future. But that is the true strength of any digital image, is being able to produce that original image file. And if you can produce it in RAW or digital negative format, it's a home run. It really is. If you don't have it, it's not the end of the world, but it does limit future options for you. The digital media itself can be evidence that I'm speaking of the memory card. There are instances where you may want to consider, instead of downloading the files and putting them onto an agency server or computer, that you may want to take the images from the memory card, but maintain them on the memory card, and the memory card becomes the evidence item. At high risk or high profile cases, that's certainly a valid approach. And ran across a couple agencies where they just have told me straight out, yeah, we save every memory card as an evidence item in the case file. We just buy, a couple hundred a year, and that's how it goes. And so that's decent. There's nothing that says you have to do it. There's nothing that says you don't have to do it. But my question to you is this: if you're saving the memory card because that is your impression of unimpeachable digital data, how did you get the images off the memory card the first time so that you could view them? And most people are like, well, yeah, we put it in the computer, or we plug the camera into the computer and we download the camera we download the card, and then we just put the card in an evidence item. Okay. But the moment you either pull the memory card out and put it in a card reader, or you connect the camera, you're establishing two-way communication. And it sounds a little far-fetched, but if you're saving the memory card because you want that exceptionally high threshold of image file integrity, you want to be able to say that there was no chance ever that the data got corrupted or potentially altered in the process of accessing it and downloading it to the computer. And so I offer to you, if you've never heard of it, there's a device known as a forensic card reader. This is one such device that's on the market. We're talking less than $100. And this device has the ability to read various format memory cards. And the key to it is that when you plug the memory card into this device and then plug this device into your computer via the USB port, this device reads the contents of the memory card while simultaneously acting as a traffic cop and not allowing any data to flow to the memory device. It is truly a one-way check valve for getting data off of a memory device while still being able to say that it is 100% certainty that nothing was changed, corrupted, altered, nothing on the original device. And to back that up, there is a NIST, Department of Homeland Security, and Department of Justice research report to test and prove that claim. And the bottom line is everyone tried using all sorts of techniques to bypass the hardware in this device and get access to the memory card. And the answer was couldn't happen. And so if you think the memory card is necessary as an evidence item to preserve this high level of image authenticity and reliability, you probably owe it to yourself and the agency to make the small investment to get a forensic card reader so that you can just as quickly shut down any claims that when you accessed it to get the images you needed to do your report and your investigation, that there was no possibility that you did anything at that moment to change the high level of reliability on the memory device. So it's just something to consider. I don't sell them and I don't make them. The other thing is once you're done and presuming you are going to save the memory, you're not going to save the memory card. You just downloaded the camera, let's just call it a straight up vehicle fire, probably mechanical, happened on the highway. You download the camera, now what do I do with the memory card in the camera? I strongly advise you to format the memory card via a wiping program. Don't bother with the delete or format option in the menu of the camera. Don't bother with delete or format options in Microsoft Windows or on an iPad. It's just not doing what you think it's doing, okay? There are commercial programs as well as a freeware wipe program, which is on the Dropbox. You can download it for free. It will format the memory device and then wipe it using a mil-spec encryption method so that there is no chance, zero, that anything that was once deleted can be recovered. All right. And I'm not saying that because I want people to hide or conceal evidence. I just want you to consider the fact that when you delete a file or format a memory card using the memory item, the menu item in the camera, or even in a Windows desktop, all you're essentially doing is telling the data bits that if they need to be used, they can. But that's all. They're still there. And it's exceptionally enlightening to see someone's face. And we do, in the classroom, I've done this, particularly with the law enforcement people, who wants to pony up the memory card out of their agency camera. And invariably somebody says, oh, here, take the memory card out of this camera. It doesn't matter to me. And we'll put it in my computer and I will use a consumer level data recovery program. This is nothing fancy. This is $29 off the internet, buy a data recovery program, and I literally pluck every photo that is on that memory card, even though it's been deleted or formatted, and to watch their faces. Like, oh, we forgot about that. Yeah. Think about the time you use the agency camera at a parade, a party, an inauguration, a wet down, a swearing in, whatever type of event you are using the agency camera to capture photographs. That's great, you know, maybe for the website, maybe for a press release, whatever. It's all fun and games. But there might be some photos in there that could be compromising to certainly agency credibility. And just because you deleted them doesn't mean they're gone. And now down the road, that image, that memory device has to be produced. Like, let's say you're all up on a fire and you start taking pictures of fire conditions in the fire scene because it's looking pretty serious. And before it's all over, you realize you've got a horrific crime scene and we're just going to hold back and wait because the state police are coming, the ATF is coming, the FBI is coming, somebody else is coming because this is moved into a high-level criminal event. And part of the process they're going to say is, did you take any pictures before we got here? Well, sure, yeah, we did because we didn't know. And they're like, no, that's great. We need your camera and we need your memory card. And you just handed over potentially some unfavorable or compromising data, and you had no choice about it. So considering that you may be saving a memory card or handing it over, you really want the confidence to know that that device was wiped and is perfectly clean before you start taking images at your next fire, explosion, whatever it may be. I just made this little chart just to kind of help people understand, you know, when you start talking about the effect of compression on the memory device and how many images you can hold. And then particularly now that maybe we've had this discussion, you think to yourself, well, you know what, we're gonna turn off compression, or we're gonna start shooting in a raw or digital negative. Just realize that in doing so, you're gonna be using a lot more of that memory card, and you may need to consider then purchasing either additional memory cards so that you can cover long events covering multiple working periods, or you just need to get larger cards so that you can safely and easily accommodate your typical 200 to 300 image, you know, dwelling fire kind of thing. And then that translates, of course, to the archiving once you get back to the office. So I just made this chart just to kind of help you understand that, you know, there's a significant impact to playing with the compression. The good news is hopefully people are starting to turn it off. The bad news is they have to realize that they will need a lot more data space to accommodate it. All right. Speaking about the victim and casualty photos, particularly from that earlier court case, you know, obviously we have protocol and sometimes legal requirements for when we capture images of people who are injured or deceased, whether they be adults or juveniles. Just make sure that as part of your image archiving and such that you're addressing those. It sounds a little silly in this day and age, but you know, when I was in the public sector and we would take photos, whether they be film or digital, we were using a digital camera in 1996 at a fire scenes. You know, it was, people said it was, you know, never going to hold up, and now here we are. But when we took pictures of victims and children, you know, we had a fluorescent yellow sticker that went right across the front of the case file announcing that the photos were victim sensitive. And so that it was a heads up to anyone who went to the case file in the future, and whether they were reviewing it or if they were providing it in response to a subpoena, you know, before you go putting the flash drive or the CD-ROM into the computer and just doing a straight copy, just realize that there are victim sensitive photos and you need to be cognizant of that. So whatever mechanism you can develop, make sure you have one so that people know, and we don't accidentally get in a situation where you know, we get a subpoena for a case file, you know, for civil litigation, and we produce copies of everything, and we produce, oh, look, here's a CD-ROM of photos. Let's just run a copy and put it in an envelope and send it out. Well, on that particular fire, we have victim or children photos that we have to take additional steps before releasing them. Just some way built into our archiving process that we don't make an embarrassing mistake that potentially opens up litigation to us later on. And the last thing here, we'll talk about when people share images with you, because that truthfully is a reality of today's world, and that you get there for your investigation. If you're not polling the crowd, or as you conduct your interviews, asking about pictures or videos that they may have taken, the next step is when they say yes, well, I need a way to get them from you. And generally speaking, we want to get them right now. We don't want to say, hey, can you come to my office tomorrow at 10 o'clock in the morning? Because they may have second thoughts, they may not care, and now they're gone and you can't get the images. So we need a way, and we need to be prepared to accept that data. In the worst case, and if no other option is available, have them email it to you or use a text message app. That should not be your default position, because in the process, you're going to lose image quality, and most text messaging software, text messaging apps now will strip the EXIF or metadata if it wasn't already stripped by the camera that took the image. This comes as the result of people understanding that when you give children cell phones and they may take selfies and then share those selfies with unreputable people online, that the GPS location is attached, and now the people know where that child is. Not a good thing. So the text messaging, the MMS or the SMS short messaging service apps often now strip that data. And so if they text you the picture or email it to you, those settings in their phone are pulling off data that you otherwise need to have, because if nothing else, it gives you the best quality image while also giving you the most information that you can use to present reliability. So my recommendation is direct cable transfer. Keep in the car or in the investigative truck a sampling of cables that will allow you to connect to Android as well as iPhone, whether it's mini or USB-C now, that you can connect to that phone and direct copy those image files or that video from that person. Yes, they have to give you consent. You let them watch if they want. Listen, I'm going to do it right in front of you. These are the only pictures I want. I just need them in their original format, in their original condition, with no strip data, no further compression, because what's already been compressed out, you're obviously not going to get back anyway, okay? Along with getting the image file, you need some basic information, not just from the person, but from the phone or the tablet device itself. And the first thing to get out of the way is who owns the device and who pays for the service. If you've never heard the term a COPE device, C-O-P-E, COPE devices are actually very common nowadays. It stands for corporate owned, personally enabled. And this essentially is a device, whether it's a cell phone, a tablet, a laptop, something, anything, where their employer, the boss, bought the device and may also be paying for the service, but they've essentially said to the employee, look, I don't care if you do social media, if you got your other, apps and stuff on here, as long as you answer my phone calls and my emails, I truly don't care. Just don't do anything illegal. And so people use these phones as if they were personal, but the truth is they are owned and serviced through someone else's control. And you want to get that out of the way up front, because if it becomes necessary to obtain consent or subpoena, you need to know who has the expectation or the control over the data in question. Okay? It's too late once you've let that person go to find out, oh, it was a COPE device through their employer. Ask straight up front. And you can ask them if it's a COPE device, but most people probably aren't going to know that term. So just follow it up with who bought the device and who pays for the service, and then go from there. If they tell you that they took, I was standing here and I was videotaping, the initial pre-arrival conditions. Have them go back out on that corner or at that point and say, here's where I was standing, here's where I was facing, I was holding the phone and I was looking at the building. You do two things with that. One, you take your own picture of them holding the phone in that position to essentially provide a frame of reference in the future that says, here's where they were, here's where they said they were standing, holding the phone, and this is what they would see from that vantage point. And then the second part of that is grab a GPS reading for where that is and then record that, because later on, if we look at the image data and we want to compare it, we now know this was the GPS stamped on the image file. And if we have it, this is the GPS of that location. It's building the reliability so that you can say to the judge or to the jury, this photo is essentially reliable because not only did I believe the person who gave it to me, but I obtained this interview information and I verified this interview information. So their reliability is exceptionally high. If they will let you, or if they will do for you, have them go into the settings of the phone and copy down or screen grab the IMEI, the serial number, the cell phone number, the service provider, and the current software version of the phone. These are all pieces of data that will be attached to the image file and will be used to confirm that indeed, this really is a picture that came from this phone by this person, versus they're showing you a picture which really someone else had sent to them, or they got in like a Snapchat or off of a social media post. It's all about building the backstory to shore up the future reliability. That's essentially what it was. All right. Synchronization of time. I know you had a great program on timelining already, so I won't go into a lot of detail here, but trust me when I tell you the correlation of standard time to device time is critical if you are looking at devices other people provide you, images other people provide you. So that's the end of this part. If you have any questions, I know we'll be doing a Q&A follow-up kind of thing in the future. I look forward to any questions, or if you have any thoughts or anything I can help you with, please bring those. And I'll kick it back over to you, Bill.
Dave, that was incredible. I've been doing this for a long time, and I remember when we used to take, we wouldn't take any more than 24 images or 36 images because we didn't want to go on to that next roll of film. But there's a lot of things that you've discussed that I'm not currently doing, and I'm going to definitely check the practices of what I'm doing. So thanks again. We will bring Dave back again after this has been available to you. And we'll see you for the next session. Thanks.